Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time around, we are checking out a mod by the name of Jackrabbit Doom, and that name alone, Jackrabbit, is probably going to spark the fires of nostalgia in a fair few of you. If you cast your minds back to the mid-90s, you'll recall that the hip, cool thing to do was to have a mascot for your given platform. Sega had Sonic, Nintendo had Mario, Sony variously had Crash Bandicoot and Spyro. They kind of battled it out for a while, and when it came to PC circa 1994, fresh from the mind of one Clifford Blazinski, yep, that one, we got Jackrabbit. He's basically Sonic with a gun. Before it was cool. Go away, Shadow, no one likes you. But enough about the past. Let's talk about the present. Jackrabbit Doom kicks off with a familiar conceit. The friends and family of Jazz have been kidnapped by the diabolical turtle, Devon Shell, and it is now up to Jazz to once more take up the gun and go on a genocidal turtle-based rampage in order to secure their safety. Yes, even the safety of Spaz. As for the pacing here, it's very much in keeping with the spirit of the original Jackrabbit. These levels absolutely whiz by, and for sake of example, this right here is the end of the second level, where I've already acquired the likes of the blaster, the shotgun, the freeze thrower here, and an Uzi. I mean, good grief, by the time you get to the third level, it introduces you to the toaster, which, let's not mince words here, is a goddamn flamethrower, allowing you to even further indulge Jazz's genocidal tendencies. Now, at this rate, I wouldn't blame you for worrying about the potential for this mod to suffer from an early bout of gameplay burnout, what with introducing so many weapons so early on. But where Jackrabbit Doom somewhat balances this out is by fairly limiting the ammunition pool early on for these weapons, just enough to give you a taste, just to have a little bit of fun with them, and then it'll pare the ammo supply during the course of the level down somewhat, forcing you to revisit those lower tier weapons and make better use of them. As for the levels themselves, you'll note that even in this early part of the mod, the visual styling of them remains pretty faithful to that of the games themselves, even down to the enemy varieties that you'll encounter during the course of them, which sadly also includes the goddamn bees.
Not the bees! Ah!
The next few levels take us to decidedly more electrical environments. I've never really quite understood the theming of some of Jackrabbit's levels. They get a little abstract every now and again, but nonetheless, these levels introduce you to yet more weapons. The Heat Seeker we've just seen, bearing an uncanny resemblance to a Rise of the Triad weapon of a similar nature, and there's also the Bouncer, which I have to say, hands down, is probably the most unsatisfying weapon to use in the entire mod. It's just such a weak feeling weapon. Mercifully though, it won't be all that long until you come across the likes of the RF launcher. This is a double-barreled missile launcher which also boasts homing capacity and packs a much more satisfying punch than the Bouncer. It also has the wonderful addition, or should I say subtraction, in that this weapon, much like others of its ilk, do not deal self-damage if you're unfortunate enough to have one of those projectiles impact on a nearby surface, and if you know anything about me, you'll know that that is an absolute godsend. As a brief aside, there's an enemy type during the course of this level that back in the day used to freak me out ever so slightly, and it's these floating, sentient, bulging-eyed bolts of electricity. I mean, what the ever-living I have to admit, I do suffer from some kind of themic whiplash every now and again going between one level and the next, because they can frequently look drastically different from one another, and as you've already witnessed, featuring drastically different enemy types. I mean, during the course of this one, I'm pretty sure I've been fighting a Marvin the Martian knockoff, as well as a handful of floating swords, because apparently the only deity that governs the universe of Jackrabbit is that of sheer unbridled chaos.
We're back in the weird electrical place again.
Despite the visual whiplash that's, let's face it, part and parcel of the Jackrabbit experience, I'd say one of the greatest strengths of this mod is the fact that it just keeps things simple. It could have easily had levels that sprawl and branch and force the player to hunt for switches and keys, but instead, these are almost universally pretty straightforward maps, instead choosing to make themselves more interesting with a light smattering of first-person platforming, which is thankfully not a dirty word with regards to this mod, and it also manifests progress nicely during the course of most levels in the form of a little bit of extra verticality. While I'm at it, say hello to the dual neutron disruptor. If the bouncer was my least satisfying weapon to use during the course of this mod, then the dual neutron disruptor is pretty much the polar opposite. 7 levels. That's all it took before I had the full featured arsenal of Jazz Jackrabbit Doom, the final piece of the puzzle being the railgun, attained rather unassumingly around the back of this music venue, just littered with posters of bands that I honestly haven't heard of before. I really need to update my playlists. And if you're wondering how many levels there are in total here in Jazz Jackrabbit Doom, it's 20. So yeah, full tank, relatively early. I'm sure you'll forgive me if I merely pay lip service to the majority of the levels from here on in, because, let's face it, a lot of what I've already said holds true for the vast majority. These are straightforward, brisk, well-designed levels with nice degrees of verticality and interesting theming throughout. You honestly do not have time to get bored of one location before you're moved on to the next and your eyeballs have to adjust to a whole new palette of colors. Excuse me a sec. Fuck you, crabs. Even with the relative variety, it's nice to see that Jazz Jackrabbit Doom also splits it up at the halfway point by providing you with pretty much a boss encounter level. This is Battlegrounds, which probably has the most badass soundtrack of the entire mod. And let's face it, it should go without saying that Jazz Jackrabbit had a goddamn fantastic soundtrack to begin with. Just make sure you watch out for the literal ground giving way towards the back end of this one, because I certainly wasn't expecting it the first time. Didn't manage to fool me twice, thankfully, and upon reaching the other side, a switch reveals the boss of the level. Yet another turtle tank, but this one's just a little bit more souped up. And if I'm gonna describe it in terms of difficulty, I'd say it could probably be a little bit more challenging. I mean, I was playing on the Hurt Me Plenty equivalent here, but yeah, I was expecting it to last just a smidge longer. So how about the back half of the levels here in Jazz Jackrabbit Doom? Do they inexplicably shit the bed and devolve into an unholy quagmire of questionable design decisions? As it happens, no they do not. And if I'm gonna be honest, that makes this mod kind of infuriating to talk about at length, because my whole shtick kind of relies on finding things to nitpick and critique, and here, there is a significant lack of stuff that is wrong with Jazz Jackrabbit Doom. Now I know what you're thinking, Icarus, there must be something, so you know what, I'll try. I'm gonna think really hard. There's gotta be something. Maybe just 1 or 2 things that irk me. Anything. Okay, here's one. There's a noise that plays almost every single time that you land from a jump here in Jazz Jackrabbit Doom, and quite frankly, it's a little annoying. No? You need something a little bit more substantial than that? Okay, fine. How about sod this enemy in particular, even if it doesn't turn up very often during the course of the mod, if only for the fact that it's hit scan, and maybe for the fact that it always seems placed in areas where it's got a gargantuan field of view. Ooh, even better. How about this one? Fire, underwater, immersion, ruined. 0 out of 10. Throw it in the trash, and don't even get me started on pandering to no-talent YouTubers. Other than that, I think it's relatively safe to say that this is a pretty damn good mod. I had a tremendously enjoyable time with this from start to finish. It features some really nice punchy encounter design. The levels are nicely paced, and the translation from those 2D originals to this Doom format is just supremely well observed. I dare say this will be a treat for fans of Jazz Jackrabbit, as well it will be for anyone that's just a fan of good mods in general. And chances are by the time this video goes up, there will actually be an updated and improved version kicking around. Such is the folly of checking out mods that are still in progress, but nonetheless, if you fancy giving this a whirl for yourself, you'll find the link, as usual, in the description below. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very much for supporting the channel and for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, maybe you'd like to see your name in the credits, or maybe you'd like to gain early access to my videos before anyone else. If that's the case, you'll find the link to my Patreon page also in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I know I've not been as exhaustive as I could be with a mod such as this, but every now and again, I'd rather you guys be able to discover a few things for yourselves. And rest assured, there's still a few Easter eggs kicking around in here, as well as a secret level. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for those, and in the meantime, Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future editions of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.